Welcome to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs. And today, Arab consternation and Western hesitation. We're talking about the Iranian regime and two different clashes of cultures and perceptions between the Arab world and the West on the issue of the Iranian threat. And there is no one better to talk about the complexities, the nuances, than our dear colleague, JCFA Diplomacy and Research Fellow North America in Washington, D.C., Dalia Ziada. Dalia, welcome to the program. Here you are as the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs Senior Fellow in Diplomacy and Research, domiciled in Washington, having a global perspective from the West on what's happening here. Israel under fire, Dalia, but what's really happening is a deeper consternation, a disappointment and concern by the Arab Muslim establishment regarding the Iranian regime, because Iran, we know right from here in Jerusalem, and you know right from Washington, is equally threatening the Arab world and the West. But there's a disconnect. How is it that the Arab world knows something so positively about the Iranian regime threat that the West is not quite sure of?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Diker, for having me on your podcast, and thank you for having me as part of the GCFA. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this important team that I think will be leading a lot of education efforts in the coming months, if not years, about helping Western policymakers understand what's really going on in the Middle East and how the Middle Easterners view the problems of the Middle East and work on solving it. Regarding your question, it's yes, we are seeing sometimes we can call it shocking divergence between the visions of the West towards the threat of Iran and the vision of Arab countries, especially in the Gulf region, towards the threat of Iran. And in the past few years, this caused also some tensions between tensions in the form of misunderstanding and lack of trust between the United States and its best allies in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and most of the Gulf countries that cannot trust the United States anymore in supporting them against the threat of Iran. This started, or we saw like the most prominent conflict between these two visions in the year 2021, when the Biden administration first came in power, and in their first week was one of their decisions was to remove the designation of the Houthis. The Houthis, a terrorist organization in Yemen, and force an embargo on selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which they needed to fight against the terrorists in Yemen. And at that time, the Gulf countries in particular felt let down by the United States, its best ally, and started to look for making alliances with other dangerous partners or dangerous coalitions in the world like China, Russia. Eventually, we ended up in a situation of lack of trust between Arabs and the United States, and also lack of or misunderstanding between Arabs and the United States. This was the consequences of this lack of trust and misunderstanding. We've seen it later on in the Russia-Ukraine war, and then again in the Israel-Hamas war, which is still ongoing as we speak.
Just wanted to jump in and sharpen one of your very important observations, in that the 2020 Abraham Accords complicated the lives of the Soviet-led Arab powers, in the sense that for so many decades, Saudi Arabia had led, together with the rest of the Arab League, a campaign that really fronted Israel, in their view, as the main obstacle to Middle East peace when they knew, but certainly since 2020 and the I would say more complex relationship with the United States and the Iranian regime threat, they knew that Iranian regime and not the Israeli nation state of the Jewish people as a democracy, free democracy, they were the real problems, which put the Arab world in a more complicated position opposite the United States, because the traditional anti-Israel position had sort of melted away.
Exactly. I remember, actually, this takes me to a very historic scene that we've seen in the year 2022, when Arab leaders from different Arab countries, I believe Morocco, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, were holding hands at the Negev summit with Israeli Prime Minister. This Negev summit, which actually one of its biggest mottos was giving Iran something to fear, which is a quote from Yair Lapid's speech on that day, on that conference, actually was the highlight of when Arabs and Israel realized that they have a common enemy and they need to fight against this common enemy without waiting for the United States to fight this war on behalf of them. And I think this also came as a result or as a consequence to the success of the Abrahamic Accords, because we have seen peace initiatives happening for so long from before between Israel and some Arab neighbors, especially its immediate neighbors, Jordan and Egypt. But it has always been called peace. It was never a warm peace, and like an actual peace between these two countries. And Israel was always labeled as a foreign body in this Arab majority region. Only after the Abraham Accords, this started to, like, this wall of fear from Israel or cooperating with Israel or integrating Israel started to melt, and Arab countries started to be more inclined to work with Israel against the threat of Iran. So, of course, it was like a very critical and important moment. But unfortunately, also, like later on, we saw that Iran was very clever in, first of all, utilizing this gap and mistrust that I was talking about earlier between the United States and Middle Eastern countries, now the new alliance between Israel and Arabs, and infiltrating into this gap through supporting radical Islamist groups, which many of them disagree with Iran ideologically, meaning some of them are Sunni while Iran are Shia, but all of them agree on one thing, which is eliminating Israel and continuing the threat against Arab countries.
That is exactly the nature of Arab fears versus American calls for freedom in the Middle East, with Iran, in their view, as an ally, not an adversary. And when we come back in the second section of our discussion with Dalia Ziada, we're going to talk about whether the Arab world and the West have actually switched sides. So stay with us. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, here with Dalia Ziada here in Jerusalem and Dalia in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the Iranian threat to the Middle East and to the West. And what we're discussing in this segment is whether the Arab world and the Christian West have actually switched sides over the complexities of the Iranian regime threat. Dalia, in a nutshell, describe for us your sense of deep Arab fears of the Iranian threat against the stability, security, and prosperity of the Arab Muslim majority Middle East.
Actually, Iran, even since like old times, it has always been a threat to Arab countries, to the Sunni world, Muslim Sunni world, if we can say, because it positioned itself as an enemy to this Muslim Sunni world, as Iran always feels like it's better in many ways than the rest of the Middle Eastern countries, and thus it deserves like to take this leadership position in the region, to lead the region. This contradicts with the natural leadership position given to some Arab countries, especially now Saudi Arabia, which leads the Muslim Sunni world. So, of course, this historic, like this conflict has been going on for thousands of years or for hundreds of years. And has not only to do with our modern day conflicts.
What we're talking about here is the root of Arab fears of the Iranian regime, which is somewhat unknown or underemphasized in the West, is exactly how concerned Saudi Arabia is about the Iranian regime.
The Iranian threat is both a religious threat and a territorial threat for Arab countries. On the religious level, the Sunni versus Shia conflict has been going on for hundreds of years, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon, despite all the initiatives we've been seeing recently between Saudi Arabia and Iran, mediated by Qatar and China and Russia sometimes. All these efforts, I don't think, can resolve this chronic conflict between the Sunni and Shia worlds. The second layer of the conflict or the threat that Arab countries see from Iran is actually a territorial threat, because Iran is perceiving itself as the leader of the Middle East region, as the leader of the Muslim world, and it wants to take this leadership position, but Arab countries like Saudi Arabia is standing in the way for this dream to come true. So also, countries like the Gulf countries, the modern Gulf countries today, they are not adopting the same old ideologies that, the caliphate system, the need to rule based on Sharia law, and all these things that intensified this conflict for a while. But actually they are adopting a very modern approach that opposes the approach of the Islamic State in Iran, the Mullah regime in Iran, the Islamic leadership in Iran. So now Iran is also viewing these Arab Gulf countries as a group of, disbelievers or people who are not really going to protect Islam in an appropriate way. So they are trying to intervene to do this on behalf of them.
And here we have the United States that for the last, goodness gracious, 14 years, primarily under previous President Barack Obama, had reached out to the Iranian regime as what they saw the responsible player in the Middle East that could actually forge stability, security for the region. As you remember, the United States had eliminated Al-Qaeda. They had eliminated Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. And the United States saw Sunni Salafism or extreme Sunni terrorism as the major destabilizing force in the Middle East. And it was a destabilizing force, but they held out that the Iranian regime could actually stabilize and securitize the entire Middle East, while the Arab Sunni world knew that this was actually creating Al-Qaeda with a state and billions of dollars of oil revenues in order to fuel a machine of regional and international terror, which essentially has happened. So the United States had not consulted the Sunni Arab leadership and their allies when reaching out to Tehran. It seems to me, Dalia, that the U.S.-led Western Alliance embraced Iran at their own peril.
Exactly. Actually, it was shocking to many Arab general public as well as leaderships at that time to see that the United States is extending its hand to Iran and seeking peace with Iran on the expense of its long-established relationships with Arab countries. To some extent, this was seen by Arab countries as letting them down by the United States, as if the United States is letting them down at a very critical historical at a very critical point in their history. One of the misconceptions in the West in general towards Iran is that they think that terrorism only is happening on the side of the Sunni radical Islamist groups. But actually, Sunni radicalism and Shia radicalism are two sides of the same coin. They carry or believe in exactly the same ideologies. The idea of invading the West, the idea of sabotaging the West from within, and also the idea of forcing their ideology on other cultures and other countries, including the United States itself. See, for example, now all the militias that Iran is sponsoring, they are not purely like 100% Shia militia. They are a mix between Sunni and Shia militants, although maybe the umbrella or the cover of these terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militia in Iraq and Syria and so on. Yes, the cover looks like a Shia group or a Shia terrorist organization or a militia, but inside of these groups, it's a mix between, like the militants are a mixture between Sunni and Shia militants.
And the reason is because when it comes to terrorism, there is no necessary contradiction between Shia and Sunni terrorists working together as long as they have a common enemy, which is Israel, which the Iranian regime called the little Satan, and the United States, which they called the big Satan.
Exactly, and also it's part of the ideology. Like the ideology is very similar. The radical ideology that the Shia terrorists or militants adopt is very similar to what the Sunni, the ideology or the radical ideology that the Sunni radicals are adopting. It's very similar. Like the base is very similar. They may have some differences in the way, for example, how we pray, how we perform certain rituals, but the core is the same.
The core is the same. That's called a tightened terror collaboration that spans across the Middle East, cuts across religious differences, and cuts across cultural and perception differences. As we go into the third segment, Dalia and I are going to talk about rebuilding an American Middle East alliance with Israel, believe it or not, as the anchor or the bridge between the Christian West and the re-emerging Arab Sunni establishment in the Middle East. Stay with us. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker. I'm here with Dalia Ziada between Jerusalem and Washington, D.C., and we are discussing re-engaging, rebuilding an alliance between the Near East and America. That's what we're calling it, the JCPA, now called the JCFA. Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is becoming the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs, and what we are discussing here, I think it's really the first time a serious discussion has taken place in a long time, and is on the what we call the Near East Midwest Alliance. What is the prospect of sort of strengthening this embrace between a moderate, security-minded, Arab-led, Saudi-led Middle East alliance of security, stability, and prosperity-driven powers?
So what needs to be done is a change in the perceptions in the United States first, and in the Arab world, and or let's say in the Middle East in general next. So in the United States, the perception need to be changed, first of all, to once again deal with Iran as an enemy, not to Arab countries, not to Israel, but an enemy to the Western world. It's an enemy to the West, it's an enemy to America, because this is what they are vowing to do all the time, to destroy America and destroy the Western culture. Iran and its allies, ranging from Russia to China to Pakistan to Qatar, I mean, all the people on this side their main goal or their main perception or their main aim in life and the ideology they are established in is mainly about destroying the Western culture and the Western societies and replace them with Islamic societies. It's important for the West to understand this and understand now that most of the Arab countries are already against this idea. Most of the Arab countries today, if not all of them, don't want to establish Islamic caliphate. They care more about their nation states. They want to keep their nation states as safe and secure as possible. They want to live in peace. Many of them have taken initiatives in the past few years to normalize relationships with Israel. There is a new understanding in the region despite the interruption we have now after the October 7 attacks and the Israel-Hamas war started. But there is a fundamental understanding in the region that Israel is an integral part of the region and it's not going anywhere. And thus many of the Arab countries in the past few years started to take the initiative of normalizing relationships with Israel and using this normalization as a bridge for solidifying its broken alliance or relationship with the United States. It's important for the United States to see it from this perspective, to understand this Arab perspective and this Israeli perspective. And also now it's important for the Arab countries to put an end to their show that they are playing now for their domestic audience in reaction to the Israel-Hamas war. It's getting too far. It's empowering no one but the radical Islamist groups in the region. They are trying to please the public audience who are sympathizing with the Palestinians in Gaza. We understand that the humanitarian situation is very bad, of course, but this should not make the Arab leaders go beyond the point of just sympathizing by attacking Israel, as we are seeing in many instances now. They understand very well that their well-being, their security, their national security depends on the security of Israel. So enough with all the criticisms that is going on, enough with all the statements that are going in the wrong direction, and let's focus on bringing the peace train back on track.
There we have it, bringing the peace train and the normalization train back on track. With all of these complexities, Dalia Ziada has brought not defiance nor dependence alone between the United States and the Arab world, but I would argue an interdependence between three major actors: the United States-led Western alliance and the Arab world and Israel, in a triangular mutuality of dependence. Thank you again to Dalia Ziada, JCPA, JCFA, Diplomacy and Research Fellow, Washington, D.C. Another episode of Israel Under Fire. See you again soon.